Welcome to the Success at Work virtual mentoring series. Today's installment is on in-person interviewing secrets, landing the offer. Our speakers, we're joined with Sara Hill, our guest speaker and HR executive.
Hello.
Our director of music and web, Amanda.
Hello.
And myself, co-founder of Petite to Queen, Lynn. And when we move right into our first part of the presentation, it's starting over. So Sara, can you share with us what this means, starting over in the in-person interviews?
Sure. So by this time, you may have phone interviewed several times. You may have had a virtual interview. You may have talked to 5 different people. It just depends on what the company's policy or what their processes on interviewing are. Don't assume that the information has been carried from one person to another. So it is starting over. Prepare, prepare, prepare. Okay. You're not going to have any notes in your interview. So you're going to be very, very familiar with your resume and be able to speak to it off of the top of your head. And I also recommend rehearsing the responses. If you have a good enough friend that wants to practice interviewing with you, that would be ideal. However, you can also rehearse your responses in the mirror. You can record yourself, but do rehearse the responses.
Sara, I'd like to ask you a question. How should you research the department where you would work?
Sure. So, part of the preparation is researching the department and the company. Researching the department can be a little more difficult than doing research on the company. So what I would recommend is, first of all, look at the job description that was provided when you applied for the job. Many times the description it does include the department where you're in, and it would be embedded like within the body of the job description itself, not in the requirements, I think. And then I also recommend going on LinkedIn and doing a search for individuals who may be working in the same company that you're interviewing for, and reading their profiles. Sometimes they may be in the organization or the department that you're applying for. And then lastly, I also would recommend going on the company website. Sometimes they have information on the department, sometimes they don't, but it's, cover all of your bases.
Terrific advice there. So we're going to move on to the next slide on getting in the zone. Sara, what can you share with us about getting in the zone?
Okay. Again, by this time, you may feel a little burnt out. You may feel that you have repeated yourself many times. And interviewing can be exhausting. And it's very easy to get frustrated by multiple interviews. So renew yourself. You're starting over. You're starting fresh. Do what you need to do prior to the interview so you really feel, refreshed. And one thing I like to do prior to the interview, an in-person interview, is to imagine myself in the position. So by doing the research on the company, doing the research on the organization, if you have that information, and then also researching the position. I can imagine myself, having certain challenges in that particular position. I can imagine myself having opportunities in that position. So it really helps me to get ready for the interview and to be really engaged. And take care of yourself. Get enough sleep the night before. Get yourself organized. Don't go to an interview when you're really hungry. I know this sounds really simple, but it really makes a difference in how you come across, and it makes a difference in the energy level that you portray while you're speaking to these people.
That's a good point, let alone maybe the distraction of your tummy growling, right?
Right.
I do have a question, Sarah, for you here about taking care of yourself. So, what happens if you're not feeling well? How do you decide if you should take the risk of rescheduling the interview?
Well, first of all, if you really are not feeling well, and it is very apparent, you're coughing, your eyes are watering, you really are going to need to reschedule. The interviewers may actually feel really offended that you have come to the interview sick, because, what if you're contagious? You would not want that to happen. So just be honest with the interviewer. On the other hand, if you're just feeling mildly ill or mildly, not well, it's really up to you to make the decision of, how am I going to come across when I'm feeling the way I am.
Right. So if you can manage it maybe with some cold medication and you're feeling okay, then go ahead and go in. All right, great.
Right.
All right. So what about your final preparation before the interview?
Okay, so I suggest making multiple copies of your resume. Do a double check on the spelling. I cannot tell you how many times I've interviewed potential employees, and there are the most basic spelling errors on a resume. So multiple copies, do your proofreading, and I also suggest printing the resume on high quality paper. Be aware of your senses. So imagine yourself walking into this interview. Do you have your pet fur on the sleeve of a coat? Do you have a button missing? Do you have, what does your hair look like? I mean, make sure it looks really professional. Now, I strongly recommend not wearing any perfume or any fragrance when you go into an interview. The reason being is you do not know if one of the interviewers are either really sensitive to that smell or if they're allergic. And the last thing you want is to have somebody have an asthma attack because you're wearing a really strong perfume.
Right.
And sound. So turn your cell phone off. Be aware of anything that you may be bringing with you that could let off a sound at a very inconvenient time. And then appearance. Your appearance it's really going to depend on the industry, but so for appearance, I really recommend looking very professional. This is a time where you're not going to want to make a bold statement when it comes to your clothing or your outfit that you're wearing. And be aware of your manners. So, if you have a bottle of water with you, for example, are there coasters on the table that you can put your bottle of water on so that you're not going to put a water stain on a really nice wood desk?
In regards to appearance, what if the industry is very casual? Should you dress down to match their style?
I would recommend not dressing down to match their style. I would recommend, if you have questions or if you're, kind of deciding how to dress, I would recommend dressing up. You don't know, remember, they are interviewing you. You are not interviewing them.
Right. When in doubt, dress up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what would the ultimate interview look like, Sarah?
First of all, like I said in the very beginning, you may feel that you have repeated yourself about 5 times, during this process of trying to be hired by this company. Do not make the assumption that this group of people or this individual that you're interviewing with knows anything about you. You don't assume they have read your resume. You're really starting from scratch on that. Be prepared to small talk. It shows that you're engaged, and it shows that you're approachable. And engage yourself in the conversation. This is where practicing prior to the interview is really critical, because when you've practiced and you're familiar with the position, you're familiar with your resume, you're able to speak to it, you do come across much more engaged, because it's easier to speak to it. And when you're answering the questions, be on point. Be prepared to have specific examples. Do not provide vague answers to questions that they're looking for specific answers on. Okay, so one of the interview types that I recommend being familiar with is a STAR format. And this is, more discussing, being on point. This will make a lot more sense when you become familiar with that type of interview.
What is the STAR format?
Perfect timing.
Okay.
I'll explain it on the next slide.
Here we go.
The STAR format interview is an interview format where the majority of companies are now using. It provides an objective way for them to learn more about you and to make a decision on if you are a qualified candidate for the position. STAR stands for situation or task. So when you're answering your questions, what situation or task are you going to be using in that particular example? A stands for action, and then R is the result. So the action is, what action did you take to address the situation or task that was at hand? And then the results are, what are the direct results of the actions that you took? And I'm going to give an example just so that it comes across clear. So in this particular example, and this was actually what I did a few years ago, is the situation or the task was, my employer was paying a very high rate for health insurance for all of his employees. The increase in the premiums had gone up significantly from the previous year. So he and I were discussing it, and the action that I took was I did a lot of research on the other options of medical insurance. I benchmarked with other companies, and I put all of the information in a spreadsheet so that he would be able to look at it and make a decision on another package. And then the results were, he was able to make a decision on the healthcare and on the insurance. It was, a win-win for the employee and the employer. And ultimately, it saved him 35% in the premium costs that the company had to pay for the employees' premiums.
No, that's terrific. And so with that example, Sara, I mean, when someone else is answering this type of question, how specific should they be in answering the questions without drowning in the details?
Good question. So this goes back to, practicing beforehand, and be as specific as you can. You can use percentages, you can use an exact number. Because of my research and my presentation, and ultimately the employer's choice, he was able to save 35% in premiums. That 35% is specific. It doesn't There doesn't need to be a whole lot of other details in that.
Okay, great. All right. Well, let's talk about repeating the process.
Okay. Stay in the moment. By this time, you've interviewed multiple times. You want to stay engaged. Remember your self-esteem. By this time, you may have been rejected for several jobs. You may feel that you're repeating yourself again and again. Boost your self-esteem up before you walk in there. Be ready for curveballs. You may walk into an interview and think you're interviewing with one person when in fact you're going to be interviewing with 5. Be prepared for that. Be prepared for questions that you may not think are coming. So another example of a curveball is an interviewer may be late for the meeting. They may end up having to leave in the middle of the meeting. Be prepared for those type of situations. And lastly, don't get frustrated. The process isn't perfect. Interviewing is exhausting, like I said earlier. And it isn't a perfect process. So continue to remind yourself that, the ultimate goal is to, get that job that you really want. Do what you need to do to boost yourself and to eliminate the frustration.
So how do you stay up over and over again when you often have to go through many in-person interviews?
I think of it as a job in itself. And I think of each interview as a specific project. So, it really is a part-time job, if not a full-time job, interviewing. And at the end of an interview, I pat myself on the back thinking I have accomplished this project. And in the event I need to go to another one, it's going to be another project.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion. All right. And so now, you've got through the interview. What do you do after the interview?
This is an opportunity that the employer or the interviewers are going to provide some time to ask questions. We talked about having those 3 questions ready after the phone interview and after the virtual interview. This is no different. Be prepared to ask questions. They can be something about the company. They can be something about the organization and how you're going to fit in. They can be something about, challenges of the role and why the person who left the role prior left it. Emphasize the interest. Verbally tell them that you are interested in the position and thank them on the spot. And as soon as you get home, you're going to send all of the interviewers a thank you email and reiterate your interest in the position. Okay. So as far as follow-up expectations, there's several things that you can do to follow up with the interview. So find the person on LinkedIn, connect with them on LinkedIn. Once you send the thank you email out, if you don't hear anything for a week, you can go ahead and email them again and then ask what the actions are from then on out.
Well, those are all great suggestions, and I know following up can be challenging sometimes, but it's a really important part to continue to show that you're engaged and you're interested. But on the other hand, without crossing over to the side of being desperate or anxious, right, Sara?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say this has just been a great series. And for all our members, if you missed part 1, on the phone interview or part 2 on the virtual interviews. They're in the library, so please go back and check those out. And we really want to say that this has been, thank you, Sara, for doing this terrific series. It's been wonderful.
And I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for providing the opportunity.
Well, you know, here we are. We're thanking everyone. And thank you, Sara, again. And thank you to all our members and guests. Thank you, Amanda, for joining us on this installment in the Success at Work virtual mentoring series, and for being part of the dialogue at Petite to Queen. If you have a question or would like to suggest topics for discussion, please email us at jointheconversation@petitetoqueen.com.